So here is a nice long table on analysis of renewable energy implementation for adaptation in funding proposals. So there are various sources of funds like Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Fund. Of course, there is the World Bank. There is the Global Environmental Fund (GEF), and so on. So total number of adaptation projects 2010 to 2020 and 2015 to 2020. This is for Adaptation Fund. This is for Green Climate Fund. Total share of projects integrating renewable energy technologies like solar, wind, hydro, maybe nuclear, etc. In terms of having a portfolio of energy sources, you want to have some sort of an integration. So there were 47 projects under adaptation funds and 64, 42% of adaptation and mixed projects, 60% of total adaptation cross-cutting project, which include both adaptation and mitigation. And then you have projects focused on water, food production, cooking, irrigation, weather prediction systems. So that's disaster risk reduction, an important part of the resilience, reducing vulnerability, as well as adaptation with early warning systems, waste treatment, heating, cooling, energy access, and resilience, right? So what are the kinds of projects? Solar and wind energy for desalination, purification, pumping station in piped network, solar dehydrator. Under Green Climate Fund, we won't discuss the differences between them and the sources and the flow of money, etc. Solar off-grid distillation, desalination, reverse osmosis, solar off-grid desalination, reverse osmosis in food production. Post-harvest processing, so solar dryers, cold storage, cooling units, etc. Solar shading, honey production we mentioned before. Solar-powered surface aerators for aquaculture ponds. And under Green Fund you had post-harvest processing, so solar food dryer, refrigerator, storage, biodigester to maintain temperature in food storage, and so on. And again, I won't read all of these, but here jumping to energy access and resilience, hydropower dam under adaptation fund, solar PV for lighting and electricity production, including solar lamps, solar chargers, solar batteries, etc. So these are the numbers, these are the percentages, and then we are looking at what the proposals are trying to do in which sector and so on. Under Green Climate Fund for energy access and resilience, we had proposals on solar PV for lighting and electricity production, including solar lamps, solar chargers, solar batteries, etc. Scaling up hydropower dam climate resilience, pumped hydropower plant using the ocean as a reservoir. So pumped hydro is basically where when you have energy available from wind or solar, you use that energy that is not being used to pump water up a slope, and then you let it flow down and drive turbines or other ways of extracting that gravitational potential energy to convert back to energy. There are efficiency issues, losses, etc. But this is one of the good ways of dealing with intermittency of power supply and power demand, instead of running peaker plants to meet peak demands with coal and so on and so forth. Okay, so quickly to read something from a blurb on climate adaptation and development finance. Climate change impacts pose severe threats to sustainable development. To be sustainable, socio-economic development can only be pursued in line with climate resilience and low carbon emissions. You don't want to subsidize projects that lock you into further use of fossil fuels or do not let you get out of fossil fuel use quickly enough, and so on. The Paris Agreement 2015 affirms this intrinsic relationship between climate change actions and sustainable development, Articles 2 and 4. Adaptation and sustainable development share some common grounds, as they should. International climate funds have adopted the concept of additionality in this regard. Additionality implies that new climate finance mechanisms should be a separate funding source solely for climate change issues, provided in addition to existing official development assistance funds. In other words, countries should not have to sacrifice other assistance for the sake of climate change. We discussed this before about creating reserves, fiscal policies, economic principles, economic structures, income sunset and sunrise sectors to plan for continued development, economic development, while also having room in the budget for additional climate risks that will come along. Okay, so in terms of funding, that needs to happen as well. As such, for the Global Climate Fund, Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, which are only mandated to support climate projects, proposals must prove the climate rationale, that the results of the investment can be shown to build resilience to climate change. Therefore, how to encourage synergy and co-benefits between climate adaptation and development remains an important question. You don't want countries to kind of play fast and lose and fast with idea of submitting proposals that are really all about development, but camouflaged as climate resilience or climate adaptation proposals. Can you always make sure? Yes, there are review panels to make sure that that happens. The separation happens. Additionality is met. Okay. Examples of mechanisms propelling private finance in renewable-based adaptation. Not sure I'll read all of that. Adaptation benefit mechanism. ABM is a result-based finance mechanism to enable enhanced climate change adaptation actions. It has ways in which it works. Green bonds. The green bonds market has expanded rapidly, and most bonds are issued for renewable projects, followed by energy efficiency projects. So there is a lot of interest from private investors in a direction called impact investment, where they want to invest in green projects, including green bonds, to make sure that everybody is moving towards climate adaptation, mitigation, resilience, vulnerability reduction, risk reduction, and so on. Insurance instruments, always important. The amphibolic nature of climate change amplifies the uncertainties of risk occurrences, and the difficulty in measuring the impacts of adaptation measures often implies reduced cost effectiveness of investments. So you make an investment and it's not as cost effective. There is also this whole idea of discounting that we talked about before, retrofitting, etc. Insurance and other risk transfers or risk sharing approaches can serve all relevant stakeholders. Okay, for instance, by enabling them to complement ex-ante risk mitigation by ensuring swift access to financing after an extreme event, which can simulate productive investments. Okay, so those are, whenever you say simulations, you are obviously dealing with economic models. Macrofinancing, we have talked a little bit already under the staff notes from IMF. Macrofinancing can provide affordable long-term finance to the populations most vulnerable to climate change and so on, that we talked about before. Public-private partnership, which I had screwed up calling it purchasing power parity. So public-private partnership, we have already discussed, is a financing mechanism to leverage the private investor's finance and its experience, its expertise in public service areas. So this is where impact investments go in as well. The way forward, let me just wrap this up now. A changing climate landscape poses significant risks as well as new investment opportunities globally. The opportunities for synergy and co-benefit in mitigation and adaptation are vast. A range of climate planning instruments already include renewable energy components, and private investors are looking into new business opportunities in adaptation. It's always okay if capitalism is working in a way that it supports mitigation and adaptation without exploiting, the people, especially the vulnerable. As it becomes increasingly accessible, renewable energy technologies can be used to enhance climate adaptation as well as mitigation efforts in developed as well as developing countries. So if co-benefit of capitalism turns out to be climate adaptation, then so be it, right? Climate adaptation decision-making cycle, just to kind of extend these ideas a little bit. Here you have national and sectoral plans. You have some iterative processes needed with feedbacks to make sure decision-making cycle includes climate adaptation goals, strategies, policies, finances, etc. Establishing adaptation framework, developing options, programming and financing, action and feedback. So I won't go through the whole thing, but you have feasibility, suitability, and accessibility, etc. to worry about. Under establishing adaptation frame, you have scoping risks, context framing, impact modeling, risk analysis, vulnerability assessment, and so on. In developing options, you have to identify options and appraise synergy and trade-offs. Programming and financing should include budgeting and financing, planning and programming, and you have action and feedback in terms of monitoring and reporting that we talked about, and capacity building. Identifying risks, adaptation gaps, and having flexible adaptation plans is critical, but as we have talked about before in this series, some hard adaptations like building seawalls, dams, grids, etc. cannot easily be changed just because risks changed. So there is always a issue of investing and then hoping things work out. And we also discussed how preparing for present risks instead of worrying too much about future risks is often a good strategy as well. Establishing the framework for renewables-based climate adaptation is necessary for ways forward. Developing renewables-based adaptation options is of course very critical. Programming, budgeting, and financing that we mentioned is very important for national and sectoral plans. Monitoring, evaluation, and capacity building, so that you are taking people along with feedbacks, not leaving people behind or forcing people to move, change livelihoods, change cropping, crop selections, etc. without capacity building to new livelihoods, new ways of producing income, etc. become very, very important to make sure that adaptation is effective, efficient, returns on investments are really worth the effort, so that you are not constantly battling climate skeptics or lobbyists and other interests who keep opposing investments in climate adaptation and so on. Okay, so I will come back and add some ideas from another IRENA report on what are the advancements in terms of renewable energies from the climate prediction point of view and so on. Okay, early warnings are something we mentioned, especially for managing intermittency. You desperately need early warnings to see when solar may become unavailable, wind may become unavailable, and how to manage the peak demands and maintain supply without fluctuating too much and without resorting to peaker plants which tend to burn coal and other fossil fuels, etc. Okay, we'll come back and look at some ideas there.